there were some very strange goings on with the stats, the viewer stats on YouTube for the last video that I posted having to do with Albert Pike and his plagiarism of Abby Poyen. It started out at 4, it sat at 4 for a little while, then it shot up to 70, and then it went down to 30, and then it went down to 7, and it went up to 50, and then it went down to 7, something like that, best I remember. And now it's kind of climbed its way up to 42. So apparently YouTube sees certain things that it considers as fake, stats, and it gets rid of them and knocks them out. And then they build up again. Things like somebody refreshing the page multiple times to artificially increase the number. But I didn't do any of that. I just sat and watched it, kind of bemused. I didn't do any of that refreshing or any software, little tricks or anything. So unless somebody else went in and tried to give me a whole bunch of artificial hits, those were legitimate hits that YouTube knocked out. But they were like even numbers, even 60, even 70. So I have no idea. It's conceivable that some professor asked his class to, his class of 30 or his class of 50 or whatever it was to look at it. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, 42 is still the highest of any of these entries. So either I've offended somebody like the Masons, or else it's just kind of sexier and more interesting than my other entries. I don't know. But I also see that 21 people have looked at the talk that I gave to the Jung Center in Brunswick a couple years ago now, something like that. And you can see I'm not so good at times and dates and things. So what I thought I'd do is to replicate that. And what I did then was to compare my own writing on certain parameters with Mathew's writing. And what I did was to go back and look at things that I had written before I ever had a chance to read Mathew's essays and travelogues and things that would express his opinion on certain intellectual subjects. Not necessarily things that I wrote before I found Mathew, because I didn't really read that kind of material of Mathew's for a year or two, something like that. I saw only his Ethan Spike works. And then gradually I started to find some essays under the star signature and so on. But that was a bit later. So even though I found Mathew in the middle of 2005, if I find something I wrote in 2006, it's really fair game. I realized I didn't get my glass of water, so I'm going to use the magic of video and very quickly get myself a glass. Okay, here we go. Now, so I've got all this on my Kindle with a couple exceptions, and where I'm going to start is with something that relates to the previous topic. But first I want to make a couple introductory remarks, and that is that when I first saw Mathew Franklin Whittier's engraving, all I had to go on was the engraving itself, which I'd never seen before. I'd never heard of Mathew Franklin Whittier before. I'd heard of his brother peripherally, but not really, didn't really know much about him, John Greenleaf Whittier. And there was his name. There was the fact that he was an author, that he was the younger brother of John Greenleaf Whittier, and there was his birth and death dates. And that's all that was on there. And I wasn't looking for him specifically. I was looking in the Sarah Orne Jewett Text Project website to see what it was about Sarah Orne Jewett, that name that seemed familiar to me. I didn't know whether I'd ever run across it in this life or not, which I still don't know. I don't remember having done so. So immediately I looked into the eyes, and as soon as I looked into the eyes of that portrait, I knew that was me. And I don't even think I picked up so much on the fact that he looks like me, which he does quite a bit. But it was the eyes. I said, that's me. I remember, being that person. That's me. As a matter of fact, Mathew Franklin Whittier's visage seems more familiar to me than this one does. I've never been able to relate to this face. And I relate to Mathew's face, especially when he was young. It's kind of strange, isn't it? But the point is that if there were any similarities between his, what I call higher mind, and I'll operationalize that in a minute, and my higher mind, they were all coincidental. There was no possible way that I could have known what his writing was at that time, anything about his philosophy of life or his values or his humor or anything. I didn't know he was a humorist. I didn't know that he wrote essays. I didn't know that he was a spiritual person. I didn't know he was a philosopher. I didn't know that he was anti-slavery. I didn't know anything about him at all. I didn't know his politics, you know. So for me to feel that I was him, it would have to be a total fluke, you know. And for there to be any parallels at all would have to be, it would be unlikely. But these parallels are so profound that I think this is a kind of proof in and of itself. So I have seen people try to prove that they were some past life figure by showing coincidences. Well, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the higher mind being the same. So let's define this higher mind. I mean, the way the mind works, the creative process, the sense of humor, the values, the attitudes, even some of the philosophical problems that particularly engaged myself, you know, in that life and in this life. Interests and associations and habits, you know, like, you know, liking puns, for example, you know, just as a small example. All of these things are part of the higher mind. Again, it's the way the mind works. The physical personality is where you were born, where you grew up, the associations you have, the dialect and the language that you learned, the people that were around you. For example, just to pull something out of the air, let's suppose that in Matthew's life, well, I'll use a real example. In Matthew's life, as near as I can tell, the name Stephen had a certain connotation. I think he thought it was a little bit effeminate. I think he thought it was, it's hard to put into words. Effeminate isn't quite the right word, but maybe a softer person, a less resolute person, somebody more easily influenced, or I don't know. I'm just kind of going around the periphery of what I feel because I still have the feeling. A Stephen was a nice guy, but not necessarily so strong or effective, I think is what I'm trying to say. Now, in this life, I have a very different association to the name Stephen. I see Stephen as kind of an intellectual champion of the right or something like that, champion of truth, you know, and a discerning person. Now, Matthew, in his day, and Franklin, both of those names, Franklin he associated with his namesake, Benjamin Franklin, and all the positive things that are associated with Benjamin Franklin. Matthew was a stronger name, a more forceful, more masculine name, but also a philosopher and a champion of the right, see? So now, I mean, I have kind of the same associations with the name Matthew, but the name Stephen I have very different associations with. That's the physical personality. And that's different. All its memories and all its associations are different. When I come across anything, I don't associate to Matthew's background and his past and all his experiences. I associate to all of my own. So that's different. But the higher mind, the values, what you think is important, the way the mind works, the type of humor that you like, the attitudes, all of that carries right on over, and it's the same person. That's my contention. It also fits with what I've studied of Eastern metaphysics, where the causal body or the mental body is said to change only very, very, very slowly over a number of lifetimes. So this finding of mine, which I can objectively demonstrate, corroborates those teachings. And I'm thinking in particular the teachings of my spiritual master, my guru, Meher Baba, who talks about this in his discourses, as I recall. Now, I am going to get my glasses and I'm going to open up my Kindle and let's get to work. Now, what I did is I went into my blog entries. Before there was such a word as blog, I've actually got a blog entry where it talks about the word blog being invented. Okay, that's how far back this goes. And what I did was to start at the very beginning and work my way up until I got to the point where I discovered Mathew Franklin Whittier in mid-2005 and a little bit beyond, not very much beyond in this case. And I would isolate out certain topics and I would write down what I had said about that topic. And then underneath it, I would write down what Mathew had said on that topic. And these were things that I could not possibly have seen before I wrote what I wrote. Therefore, we're demonstrating the parallels between Mathew's higher mind and mine. I'm going to show that it's the same person on that level. So I'll just start here at the top. And this is one that I don't have anything written down for Mathew, but I do have a book. We're going to go from original sources on this, primary sources. And I will say that the person that recently rejected my paper, partly because I hardly had any citations, I'm going to say again that I used almost all primary sources, which is top-notch scholarship. You don't rely on what anybody else has said. You go in and go to the primary sources yourself. I had to do that because everybody else had it wrong. So I cited those things in line. So there was lots of them, except I don't think that person actually read the paper. So she didn't see, those citations in line. You can tell I'm a little annoyed about that still. So this is from September 15, 2002. And the very nature of this is that I'm going to have to read quite a bit. I'll try to read in an entertaining fashion. Hopefully I won't put you to sleep, but I have no real choice. I can't summarize these things because this is evidence. So therefore I have to read the evidence. It's not like I have a rock I can show you, like Michael Cremo could show you maybe an object, my object is the writing itself in this case. So I wrote in this blog, and I'm taking excerpts out. In the last few weeks, I've contacted each PBS station individually requesting permission to send a copy of In Another Life. That's my documentary. About 30 of them responded in the affirmative. Only one of them took it, though. One, KBDI in Denver, has accepted. They're not in existence anymore in case you look them up. And one has rejected. PBS headquarters also rejected the show, rather summarily, I thought. I've also entered 4 film festivals. I'm going to see how it goes with those 4 before entering too many, as the entry fees add up. No film festival ever accepted my program. Also, despite the fact that the subject matter is a bit radical for PBS, the overall tone of the show is more in line with the PBS philosophy than it is with the prevailing atmosphere of most film festivals. It's family values, but it's radical family values, which means it kind of straddles both camps without totally fitting in either. Now I think I get to the gist of it here. I might add that this is why you don't see this kind of show on television. It's extremely difficult to get funding for, and also to get copyright permission, cooperation for. I would have had a segment about Captain Robert Snow, head of the homicide branch of the Indianapolis Police Department, but I couldn't get funding to fly up for the interview, and not a single person who owned copyright to his former personality's paintings would give me the time of day. Hence, no segment. Hence, as far as society is concerned, it doesn't exist. So society's reality is thus self-regulating. Well, I didn't find anything that was exactly on point, but in the September 1857 edition of the Portland Transcript, I don't seem to have kept the exact date, but I think it's 26th or something like that. There was a letter from his known character, Ethan Spike, about picnics, a town picnic in his fictional town of Hornby. And this is after he had been exposed as the author of Ethan Spike very recently. Now, the real subject of this is picnics, and the picnics that he had gone on with Abby, but in particular, it's about them being caught in their intimacies and separated and castigated and shunned and so forth. See, Well, I've been through this before, but there's one particular quote that I want to mention. He says, there will most likely have to be a town meeting on it yet. What he did was in the picnic, there's a girl from another area, and she just took his arm and they just walked away from the picnic, see, which means, of course, they had a relationship. And the fact that they walked away from the town picnic means that they have walked away from society and ignored the rules of society. It's symbolic. So he says there'll have to be a town meeting on it yet, though there is some talk of Elder Fossil's going to preach about it. Elder Fossil is the local minister. From the 7th chapter and 42nd verse of the first book of Nicodemus. Well, I've talked about this earlier, and that turns out to be Nostradamus, and there is a 7th century and 42nd verse that talks about getting caught in the scullery, and the great prince, trying to poison the great prince, and they get caught, the two, well, it's a reference to them probably getting caught making out in the kitchen. But here's the quote from the 7th chapter and 42nd verse. Them that sins in a corner shall be winked at, but them that go again public opinion can't go to heaven at any price. And it goes on, Jim is the character. If Jim would only say he was sorry or that he didn't mean to or something of that sort, there wouldn't be so much difficulty, but he won't. He's just as impertinent as can be. Says how if he's a mind to walk or talk with a gal, there's nothing in the Constitution again it. Just as cool as a cucumber, Jim is. Now, I talked about last time how Matthew was shunned for teaming up with Abby, for becoming her beau, her boyfriend. And that's an example. He's talking about it many years, like 18 years in hindsight about it in this humorous piece, but that's specifically what he's talking about. So we can see that basically that I seem to be not particularly in tune with society, and I don't care. And Matthew was also not in tune with social expectations of society, and he didn't care. See, so there you have a kind of a defiant side to my higher mind, which was also Matthew's higher mind, that was kind of anti-authoritarian and didn't care what society thought. See, so that's the higher mind. That's a value and an attitude. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now here, let's see. I have traditional religion. Let's go to that one. And this is my views. I've got quite a long segment here. I don't know. I can't read all of it. And then the comparison with Matthew is going to be an antiquarian copy. We're going back to primary sources. This, let's see, I've got several of these. This is on January 6th, 2005. This is the year that I found Mathew Franklin Whittier, but it's a few months before. I'm picking this up in the middle. I also commented on 2 Billy Graham columns dealing with reincarnation. This is in my blog. Normally, I don't address Christian beliefs at all because open-minded Christians gradually see the truth of reincarnation and come around, while fundamentalists are in their own world of slogans and won't discuss it with you rationally, despite the fact that they truly believe they are being rational. They have abdicated rationality in favor of blind faith. And then with that as a base, they start thinking again. But the base is a series of interwoven beliefs they have learnt by rote, rather than reaching deep into their being for the truth that goes beyond beliefs. It's a state and stage you can respect as having its own type of merit, kind of a cocoon. But you can't have a rational discussion about anything outside the cocoon with someone inside the cocoon. You can't have a rational discussion about anything which contradicts the belief system. So that's enough of that. But here's my comparison. This is a booklet that was fashioned out of a series of talks by the president of the Spiritualist Society in Portland, Maine. We're talking 1856, 1857. This president's name, he was also the president of a railroad, was named Jabez C. Woodman. Well, Matthew reviewed these talks, and he says that they were very poorly prepared, that he wasn't prepared for his talk. But when you see them in here, they're very well organized and very well prepared. very clear. So past life memory tells me very clearly that this is my work. In other words, Matthew was behind the scenes, and he not only helped to prepare the speech probably, but he wrote the pamphlet. And I'm not just pulling this out of the air because his name is here as an officer of the club. They would typically, when they published a book like this, at the front of the book will be a letter by the people who are requesting that it be published. M.F. Whittier is signing as one of the officers. So it's not a big step knowing that Matthew did everything from behind the scenes to the fact that he was the one that actually wrote this pamphlet, and I'm quite sure he was, except for the fact that he believed that St. Paul was genuine, and I don't. It's exactly like something I would have written. It's very powerful logic. You know, this is what annoys me so much when some reviewer accuses me of using rhetorical fallacies, because Matthew had been a member of the Nixian Club debate club in Portland, Maine, and he had a powerfully logical mind, which I do also, despite the fact that I can't remember what I'm saying sometimes. So I'm going to read you, this was in response to a traditional preacher named William T. Dwight. And Dwight apparently was in favor of hanging and was an Old Testament guy. You know, I've got a description of him. And his basic take on spiritualism was that God doesn't want us to know. These are the mysteries that God doesn't want us to delve into. That was his argument. And I'll read to you some of Matthew's rebuttal. Remember, this is Mathew Franklin Whittier, not Jabez C. Woodman, in my opinion. So he quotes Dwight, and I'll just read a little bit of that. The state of the invisible world is absolutely secret with God. He's quoting. The world of spirits, and I include here heaven and hell, their respective localities, so far as they have locality, the actual condition of departed persons individually, and all intercommunications with such persons and with the dead generally, all this, excepting the few and general revelations which are contained in the scriptures, is entirely hidden from men, and so on. He goes on like that. So here's Matthew's commentary. All this is mere dogmatical assertion. And what is worse, it is directly contrary to the doctrines of the Bible. There is no book like the Bible to prove the progressive nature of revelation and the faith of spiritualism. The revelations that are therein recorded were given from time to time in a very gradual manner and spread over a period of more than 4,000 years. One revelation was given to Adam, another to Noah, and others still to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One revelation was given to Moses at Sinai, another in the land of Moab, others still to the various judges, and some very important ones to Samuel. Other revelations were given to David, many others through many ages by other prophets whose writings have come down to us, others still by other prophets whose writings have been lost in the lapse of time, and doubtless many more by seers and prophets that were never committed to writing. In the fullness of time, Christ came when higher and still more important revelations were made through him. How does the fact that God has made unto us certain revelations, which are recorded in the Bible, furnish, quote, decisive evidence, or even the slightest evidence, quote, that he has proposed that we should know nothing additional in relation to the world of spirits? Did God's revelations to Adam furnish, quote, decisive evidence that it was his purpose that none of Adam's posterity, quote, should know anything additional? Did his revelations to Noah furnish, quote, decisive evidence that it was his purpose that none of the posterity of Noah, quote, should know anything additional? Did his revelations to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob furnish, quote, decisive evidence that it was his purpose that none of their posterity, quote, should know anything additional? And so on. So I don't want to get bogged down into the particular arguments. The point is that it's the same mind who is defending spiritualism and rational inquiry into spiritual topics, and who sees religion as a traditional religion as a retarding force, in that growth. So, I mean, it's the same person. It's manifestly the same attitudes, values, perceptions. So here I have, let's get into something a little less highbrow, low appreciation talks. So here we have simply the feeling that the frustration of not being understood and not being appreciated. You've seen me to, play that song many times if you've watched these blogs, and especially if you've read my written ones. Matthew had the same feeling and the same attitude and the same frustration. So here I am in February 2004. This is a year and a half before I found Matthew, roughly. Recently, I co-taught a class on reincarnation at a local metaphysical center. I couldn't afford to advertise extensively, but we did put the word out in a local spiritual online website and the local newspaper. The class was also advertised on the center's sign for a week on a busy highway. Aside from 3 members of the center, we had 1 attendee from the general public. I was well prepared and nobody got bored that I could see at any point in the 3.5-hour presentation. I can't remember it being that long, but it was odd to have only 1 person sign up. I mean, I've got some of these entries that have only maybe 4, 5, 6 people that have looked at them. More things change the same. I'm not sure what to make of this. It would appear that society simply doesn't want it, doesn't take it seriously, and isn't interested. I also see, searching on ebay.com under the word, quote, reincarnation, that knowledgeable people have been trying to teach in this field for decades, and that hardly anyone bids on the books that surface there. Okay, so now we're going to go to Matthew. This is a letter to his brother. I have a few letters of Matthew's. I have copies of them. This was written in February 19, 1857, not too different from this book that I just read. And he says, spiritualism continues on the increase in this city. There are 2 meetings every Sunday, one at Pianoforte Hall on Federal Street. I found that it was a piano store and they let them have meetings on the top floor. And the other at the rooms of the, quote, Mechanics Institute. At the latter, the attendance will average about 400. The officiating clergymen at this house are J.G. Woodman, president of the York Cumberland Railway. That's the president we just talked about. S.B. Beckett, one of the correspondents of the Advertiser, Mr., and I couldn't read his name, Blue something, and myself. Now he says, I have preached 4, quote, sermons this winter. Once from the text, quote, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your philosophy has dreamed of. And at another time, my text was, quote, what good will it do? Will it pay? So far as I can judge, my efforts in this line have not been remarkably edifying, having rather an amusing tendency. One of my parishioners told me the other day, quote, he liked to hear me preach. It was so funny. Encouraging, wasn't it? Another says my sermons are as good as Dow Jr.'s patent ones. That's like they published a book of sermons that ministers could use if they wanted. Thus, my parochial labors are encouraged. Of course, they are much lighter for it. So Matthew's typical sarcasm, but he's up against the same problem and he's having the same frustrations and he's responding to them pretty much the same way that I am. So this problem of being ahead of my time and of trying to educate to people who don't have the slightest interest and the frustration about it continues right on through. Let's get into something a little bit deeper. I've got this one titled Substance and Reflections. And these are short. Some of them are. In my blog of April 26th, 2006, this is about a year after I discovered Matthew, but I had not, I believe, really gotten into any of his essays, just mostly some of his humorous works. So I really didn't start researching Matthew, in earnest until 2009. So, I might have stumbled across a few things, but really not very much. So I doubt that I had read any of his essays up to this point. So I am writing in my blog, the ocean symbolizes the infinitude of God. Sharks symbolize the powerful thoughts that lurk in the unconscious. In our physical world, the ocean is not God. It is salty, undrinkable water that is subject to terrible storms. So this is a reflection, kind of a bad knockoff. It can and often does kill people. Likewise, in our physical world, sharks are obviously not deep thoughts. They are killing machines which can and sometimes do kill people. So the outward physical symbol is not the same as the inner reality. If you look at these things as the outward form, they clash. We want to relax at the beach, but there are the sharks to consider. It is a jolting thought and poor taste on my part. But if we use the symbol to look for the spiritual reality behind it, we see that they do not clash at all. The ocean of God only kills you in the sense that you have to leave your false self behind in order to plunge into it. The quote sharks of deep thought only kill you in the sense that they slay your limited and limiting beliefs and opinions. So if you dive into the ocean of God, deep and powerful truths will attack and devour your ignorant assumptions, and ultimately it will mean the death of your false self. I don't know that I need to explain that. You kind of either understand it or you don't. But the gist is that I'm a mystic, that I have studied the mystical teachings, the concept of manifestation, the concept of as above, so below, that this world reflects, however imperfectly, the archetypes and the higher realm of spirituality, which is the real world. Um, and it's the mark of somebody who's studied the mysteries. But Matthew had also studied these things, initially, I think, from Abby Poyen, his soulmate. So let's see, how many have I got? There's quite a few here, and because I kept finding them. But I'm going to start down at the bottom, and we'll see how much time I want to spend with it. This is from The Rose of Sharon, published for the year 1842. This poem at the tail end is attributed to a minister named Edwin H. Chapin. I've done an entire blog entry on this before. It was not Edwin H. Chapin. I don't know how his name got attached to it. I don't think he intentionally stole it, but this was written by Mathew Franklin Whittier. Matthew quotes this in an album that he signed for someone in 1851. He did not put Chapin's name on it. I think that was intentional. But you will see this same understanding of mysticism in this poem. And then I'll go back to a couple things that I can more definitely prove as Matthew's work. But this is the one that expresses it most strongly. And this guy, near as I can tell, his other writings, because he didn't write much poetry, he wrote with someone else, he wrote a hymnal. And I don't see that kind of understanding in the rest of it. As I recall, it's things like the beauty of all the congregation and agreement, worshiping together and things like that, things that you would expect from a traditional minister. This was clearly written by a mystic. So he says, this is called The Beautiful, the poem. And here in the fourth section, he writes, all nature is beautiful in its time, through every season, in every clime, in the evening rainbow, the undimmed noon, the clouds, the mountains, the tides, the moon, in earth and sky, in sea and air, beautiful, beautiful things are there. Yet these are the finite, visible powers that live in this outward world of ours, the eye that looks inward, pure, intense, below the features of mold and sense, shall behold a spirit of beauty, one that lives in all, is confined to none, apart like strength from the ocean's power, like fragrance apart from the scented flower, like light apart from the radiant star, far changing and finite and frail they are. You see? What he's talking about, the original archetypal realities of these signs that are down here in the physical world. And then he says, and this is the part that Matthew quoted in the album that he signed for someone, oh, not in the outward world alone may the beautiful be to the soul made known. In its own far depths, in its inner life, silent and pure is this spirit rife, seen in the love that is still the same in the captive's dungeon, the martyr's flame, as it is in the hour of joy and light when life is unclouded and hope is bright, seen in the mercy gentle and nigh to the destitute's moan, the sufferer's sigh, in the tear of repentance, the widow's mite, the truth that is firm to the good and right, in meekness, forgiveness, all caps, humility, prayer, in hope that can suffer, in faith that can bear, in deeds and in motives untold by the tongue, by chisel uncarved, by poet unsung, unmanifested, in orbs like yon bright ones that silently roll, the beautiful lives in the depths of the soul. They only who know it, its presence who feel, through the outward, the inward and true can reveal. For them is a meaning in ocean and flower, and the coarsest has beauty, the weakest has power. Clearly, he has studied the same teachings. Okay, as above, so below. See if I can find one more. This is written by Mathew in the January 26th, 1850 Portland transcript. He's signing as Caleb Leathers. I did an entire entry disavowing the pseudonym Caleb Leathers as Mathew's work. I subsequently found that indeed it is his. So I'm going to quote this as Mathew's, and he says, no, and there's a couple little clues in here. He uses the word sublunary. This is now the 23rd instance of Mathew using the word sublunary in his works, including in his original version of The Raven. And Poe took it out. But Mathew had the word sublunary. Here again, he's using the word sublunary. And there's another one, which I may come up here. But like all things sublunary, those joys then come to have proved phantoms. He's talking about the joys of childhood, boyhood. One after one, as I have advanced on the path of life, they have retired from me. But the light eternal dawns somewhat on my vision, and I am not without hope that it will grow to a full and perfect day. In boyhood, our eyes are fixed on hope's flitting illusions. These are not to mock us, but are shadows of substantial joys which are latent in our souls. It is the main business of our lives to evolve these joys through spiritual culture and discipline. The end of our existence is ecstasy. Did we but understand this truth, our souls would not waste their strength in, quote, strenuous idleness, but would at once advance to their final aims. So what comes to my mind is this is the kind of thing you'll hear people who have had near-death experiences say. What's really important is the spirit. See? So the things, again, he's saying that the things down here are shadows, the shadows of substantial joys which are latent in our souls. So Mathew had studied high mysticism from Abby, again, initially. Abby was the co-author of A Christmas Carol. She is the one who put the spirituality in A Christmas Carol. She was Mathew's teacher in these matters, and he learned well. He obviously had an excellent teacher. So now let's do one or two more, and I mean we've got a few of these. Materialism. What did Mathew say? What did I say about materialism, and what did Mathew say about it? Well, again, we're going to be going to Caleb Leathers, but let's see what I said. This is July 13, 2005 in my blog entry. This is right about the time I first discovered Mathew, but I had read very, very little of his work. Right? This is like a month after. So this is a footnote. And so I'm going to read the line or two, the line that goes to the footnote, and then I'm going to read the footnote. Again, this is my evidence. If I had rocks to show you, I would hold them up. But what I'm reading is the actual evidence. When I was in college, I felt oppressed by the stifling materialism that prevailed in my classes. And then there's two asterisks. Now in hindsight, I realize what a, quote, snow job society has done on its young students. And I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis in the Narnia series. The professor would say, what are they teaching in these schools? And this is exactly what he meant. So here is what I say in my footnotes. And remember, I had no idea what kind of author Mathew Franklin Whittier was, or what his politics were, or whether he was religious at all, or whether he had studied mysticism or anything else. For all I knew, he could have been an engineer, a hydraulic engineer. I had no earthly idea. For many years, this is myself now in, what did I say, 7/13/2005. For many years, students have been taught in college that modern science has brought us out of the realm of superstition and into the realm of objective intellectual inquiry. This is only partially correct. Materialistic science was a reaction and represented a pendulum swing. It was a reaction against the degradation and distortion of the spiritual perspective, meaning it wasn't a reaction against spirituality, it was a reaction against the degradation and distortion of that spirituality in traditional religion. As such, it is subject to its own degradation and distortion, which we are seeing today. For example, we can patronizingly dismiss the idea of nature spirits, believing that we are now enlightened and have explained nature in purely physical terms. What is more likely is that the idea of nature spirits that the scientists were exposed to was a degraded version, parentheses, because they were not receptive or prepared for hearing the pure teachings, that had degenerated into superstition. So the skeptics always attack the degraded version. They never see or touch the original, authentic versions. They attack what some ignoramus has made of it. It's called straw man, attacking the weak position. For example, a documentarian investigating religions manages to visit with representatives of each religion who match his own level of sincerity and preparation. If he concludes that they are bogus, it is because he is insincere and unprepared, and so becomes attracted to and attracts bogus practitioners. There may have been a genuine one in the house next door, but it will never come to his attention. Having proven to himself that religious practitioners are bogus, he will go away satisfied and report that fact to his viewers. People with the same mindset will watch the program and feel that their beliefs are confirmed. But all this has absolutely nothing to do with what's really out there. Similarly, what materialistic science has rejected is the poor knockoffs of the mystical or spiritual worldview, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So then I go on with an example. I don't think I need to continue with that. Now we've got Matthew writing again as Caleb Leathers in the November 25, 1854 Portland transcript. He says, "I don't believe that experiment or observation will induct us to the ultimately and absolutely true. We are assured by the highest authority that the kingdom of God comes not by observation. It is an interior spiritual kingdom. It is not to be known by the experience of observation, but it is intuited by the Spirit." And then he goes on with examples like that, but I think that's enough to give you an idea. Down at the bottom, let's pick it up down here. The mind of man is constitutionally related to truth. I'll say that again, that's a mouthful. The mind of man is constitutionally related to truth. The latter is unfolded in the instincts of the former, and thus it spontaneously educes truth. The soul of man contains the embryo of all truth, and under favorable conditions it is unfolded into clear intelligibility. Truth is more within than without us, and is therefore more legitimately eductive than inductive, Locke and Comte to the contrary notwithstanding. The inward is positive, and the outward is negative. The outward is mainly valuable as the transcript or representative of the inward. And then he quotes, all on earth is change. All beyond is substance. So this is the mystical perspective. As above, so below means the higher realm of the archetypes is substance, that's real. The reflection on earth is the insubstantial or the unreal. The initial hints of all unfolded truth were given from within. Corroborative testimonials of that truth are had from without, doubtless, but the soul is first cognizant of, because more cognate to, the truth. The kingdom of God, the innermost center of truth, is within us. The word is nigh to us, ever within our hearts. The outward and rudimental witnesses of the spiritual central truth which glide in through the senses, are only of a symbolical or representative character. The much vaunted inductive philosophy, Comte's positive philosophy, can have no just precedence of the educative philosophy. The latter, rather than the former, is the sovereign method of acquiring truth. That pervading wisdom which is from beneath and which is earthly, sensual, and devilish is mainly the offspring of this usurping inductive philosophy. Whoso readeth, let him understand. That is, if he or she can. Matthew was ahead of his time. He's still ahead of this time. Because those of you who don't understand this, Matthew's still ahead of you. And he's back in the 1800s. You understand how far afield Western society has gone in following materialism. You know, this is why I write to 600 university professors, and hardly a one bothered to respond to me. Maybe one or two have responded here or there, and then they don't follow through because I offend this. You know, Matthew saw the trend in his day and warned about it. We are now hip deep in that trend. And as Matthew reincarnated, I have the same higher mind. I am still writing to them with the same message, and they are ignoring me because they have gone down this mistaken path so far that they're just blind. So, but let's just stick with today's topic. How did I know that I was that simpatico and compatible with that person in that etching in 2005? Right? So we'll move on. Let's try puffing. Puffing means hype. I have been averse to hype all my life. I've delighted in exposing it and deconstructing it. I remember that I had an assignment in school where the teacher had us deconstruct advertisements, and I loved it. I could have done that all year, you know. And when Lee Camp does that, I love it, you know, deconstructing lies and deconstructing hype. Well, here's what I said about hype. This is the same blog entry in which I discovered Matthew. I don't know if I mentioned that. I don't think I copied that part out, but this is June 6th, 2005. That's the entry in which I write about having discovered Matthew. But in that same entry, I also say, just a couple days ago, as I write this update, I worked on a television shoot. I was in video production with a young woman who told me she had lived in Portland, Maine. That's where I am now, which is where Matthew lived and worked. She explained to me that the culture in New England is not to put oneself forward, not to brag or try to stand out. This has been my tendency in this life, so much so that I have been told it hampers my efforts to promote myself for my career. Recently, someone wrote me asking how much I would charge to lecture at his university in Canada. Can you believe that? I wrote back very honestly and told him that I am certainly not in demand as a speaker, which is true. That's too bad. I wish that a Canadian professor would contact me now. But I demurred at that time. But the reason is not that I'm a bad speaker or don't know what I'm talking about. The reason is that I'm simply an unknown who isn't taken very seriously. People are attracted to flashier presentations, and if a dash of spiritual ignorance is thrown in to make it more palatable, so much the better, because people resonate with it more when it's diluted. But why did I purposely play myself down? See, I'm regretting it even then. If in fact I was Matthew, I was taught this as a virtue in that culture, and it has stayed with me, except that in this culture, the U.S. in general, in the year 2005, it's not so much considered a virtue. In fact, if you don't use superlatives, people assume you must really be terrible. It's similar to resume references, where if your references don't say you're the most outstanding worker they've ever had, the prospective employer assumes you must be awful because of, increasing hype, like, weapons, build up. I avoid all that hype, and as a result, when I honestly appraise my own work in an understated way, people who are expecting superlatives must assume it's really nothing to write home about. And by the same token, when I state something remarkable because I believe it to be true, people assume I'm exaggerating. And then in July 13, 2005, I said, I am in a unique position to present an honest, objective case for reincarnation because I have been practicing strict honesty as a spiritual discipline for over 30 years. That's continued. It's now 47 years, I think. This is why the VHS tape and DVD have been priced at $25. However, the accepted practice is, I don't agree with the technique of charging $24.99. The documentary is imbued with this degree of honesty throughout, and so on. And that's true. I was strictly honest, and I was strictly honest not only in the producing of it, but in the marketing. And you'd think that'd be a plus, but the truth is that if you don't use superlatives and say that it's the most wonderful thing that's ever been done, people assume it can't really be all that great. Now, this is Caleb Leathers, which is Mathew Franklin Whittier, in June 23, 1849, the Portland transcript. He says, I am not much given to puffing. Puffing was hype. I have always thought that one's breath might be used to better purpose than to be spent in the utterance of fulsome and unmeaning praise of anything. Indiscriminate puffery, too, greatly depreciates the value of judicious laudation by reason of its great plentifulness. Exactly the same insight. Inflation, in other words, of meaning. Puffing has been overdone, and consequently but little attention is paid to it. Yet should we never be backward in expressing our hearty approval of anything that is really useful, if by that approval said usefulness may be extended. And he goes on, but I think that's the gist, So that's enough for this particular topic. We'll just do maybe a little bit more here. Here I've got a category called, which I just, for convenience, called Appreciation Spiritual Music More Than Worldly. I think I talked about this before in my talk, but maybe we'll close this one out with this particular topic. Here's what I wrote in the March 6th, 2004 entry. Again, this is about one of my favorite musicians, Eric Johnson, the guitarist. And I say, let me tell you about this concert. Eric is clearly a guitar virtuoso, as evidenced not only by his playing, which I'm not qualified to judge, and his reputation, but also the spontaneous outbursts of awe from guitarists seated behind me. This was written after attending a classical acoustic concert. I've heard him called one of the 10 best guitarists in the world, and yet he's not well known. He only fills a small auditorium. Lucky for me, I suppose. Why? He's manifesting a high spiritual vibe. When he's playing electric, I'd have to use words like majestic, soaring, intensely devotional. When he's playing acoustic, including his more recent work, I would be hard-pressed to describe in words what he's expressing on that inner level. And I go on with some personal references. Then Mathew writes in the Portland transcript, these are letters from New York City, letters from the great city. It's a series, or it was supposed to be a series. At this time, this is published in the January 25th, 1845 edition of the Portland transcript. At this time, he's living in New York City. He's writing, signing with his go-to signature, a star, for the New York Tribune. Reviews and essays. Scholars have mistakenly attributed these, the whole bunch of them, to Margaret Fuller. She was the literary editor, but she was not the author of these star-signed reviews and essays. Those were Mathew's. But he also wrote a couple of letters to the editor of the Portland transcript from New York City. And I don't think he signed them. He just signed it with letters from the great city as a series. So Ole Bull, I think that's how you pronounce his name, was a violinist. And I have a photograph of his. And I'm telling you, I knew him personally in his later years. I'm absolutely certain of it. Mathew reviews him quite favorably many times. And this is the first time that he ever saw Ole Bull perform. So he says, last night I went for the first time to hear Ole Bull. I presume it was not a fair test of the genius of the renowned violoncellist. At any rate, I saw nothing of that latent enthusiasm stealing unconsciously into the face, nor of that soul-felt earnestness which must in some way be the concomitant of true genius. He is a tall, slender youth, nearly blonde, rather handsome, but not spiritual-looking in the least. He holds his violin daintily, as if he felt a tenderness for it, and wears while playing a countenance of sweetness and content. like one who knew just what he was about and what he was able to accomplish. But he has genius, though perhaps not of the highest original character. I speak as one unlearned in the rules of the art, but I feel that he has genius, or he could never have moved me as he did, waking up the very depths of emotion, suggesting sentiments of beauty and power, and carrying me out from the dull actualities of life into the freshness and glory of the true world. Another thing, when he touches the instrument, we forget the artist. We forget he is playing the violin. We hear only music. It is not Ole Bull. It is not a concert. We breathe the atmosphere of sweet sounds. It is as if wings swept by and music, not light, glowed from them. There was a part in which we heard the dying away of bells, sweet and chiming, borne off amid the hills, and the picture was instantaneous of one of Christopher North's exquisite sketches of rural life, and verdure and sunshine and rustic love and simple grief. Here was enough. Any audience should have been content to have one such luxury of soul and feeling awakened, and have gone reverently homeward, blessing God that, quote, a thing of beauty is a joy forever, and have treasured this as one of the gems of the spirit to be carefully set, and not filed by the entrance of any other guest, at least till this were lodged and fostered. Really, I do not see how people endure so much of what is really excellent. A poor piece of music makes so little impression that one's nerves can bear the repetition, but where the impression is deeper, I do not understand this cormorant, pardon the ugly word, reception. I observe the practice still prevails of encoring our public performers. Why, if a thing is worth a repetition, it is too much to bear it. I would as soon recall a rainbow which spanned the heavens for a moment, amid smiles and tears, and was gone, and whose beauty had become a part of my sense of loveliness. It gives one a heartache, this addition to one's sense of the beautiful. It makes a discordant sound, an uncongenial atmosphere, the hardness, the materialism of the world, the wrong and injustice of man to man, grate so harshly upon the finer life that our being becomes a torture. You see how sensitive Matthew was. I'm the same way. I can remember that in the concerts that I went to, at least the electric ones, where Eric Johnson and his band played, they would call him for encores. He would play 4, 5, 6 encores, literally. But after a while, it did strike me as kind of selfish. Like, can't you appreciate, what you've had? Do you have to drag this guy out to play yet again and again, So I'm the same person. Now here, let's close with, this is written later. This is November 28th, 1845. So the one we just read was January 25th. So this is November of the same year. And this is Ole Bull's farewell concert. I think he got to appreciate him more as time went on. And we'll be done here. The tabernacle was full to overflowing for Ole Bull's farewell concert. The doors were open at 7, and at 10 minutes past 7, all the best seats in that large house were taken. This is written as the star in the New York Tribune, by the way. This is Mathew Franklin Whittier, not Margaret Fuller. The novelty of the evening was a duet between the violin and the voice. Miss Northall sang her part with sweetness and spirit, yet the tones of the violin were so exquisite in reply as to remind us of the tales of magic, where a mortal carries about a spirit imprisoned in some instrument, so that when he holds discourse with his prisoner, the mortal is answered by the celestial language. The Niagara was coldly received, as usual, as the name of the piece, for people had a preconceived idea of this piece, which has prevented them from ever fairly hearing it. We observed a repetition of this in the experience of those around us to whom it was new. It is not what we expected, they said, and then went on to tell how they had felt at Niagara. The composition will have a fairer chance in Europe. As to the view taken of it by our audiences, or such as have been present the 3 times we have heard it, or finding those who had let the Niagara pass with cold silence, boisterously encoring the buttermilk and familiar grunt of Nora McShane, we were forcibly reminded of the pathetic lines in the rejected addresses. I had a grandmother, she kept a donkey, and when that donkey looked her in the face, its look was sad, and you are sad, my public. And he says the connection of thought is subtle rather than obscure. In other words, he's calling the public a donkey. um, so this is Matthew talking about how shall I put this? The thick imperviousness of the public, of the general public, of the mass of humanity, relative to the artistic sensitivity of someone who is an older soul, like Matthew, like myself. I have the same traits. I could go into my history of musical appreciation, which which I don't think I will, but I'm the same person with the same reactions. So that should be enough to give you an idea of how I can objectively demonstrate that Matthew's higher mind has continued right on to the present so that I have the exact same higher mind that he does. It's more than just, I break it down into different categories like humor and attitudes and values and creative process and the way the mind works and so on. Those are pointers, but I mean the whole mind. I am the same person that Matthew was. I've got a new body. I've got a new physical personality. I have new associations. I have a new personal history. I'm living in a new era, but I'm the same person on that level. I'm the same person. I haven't changed. And that's true for every single one of you as well. So there is a little more evidence of the same phenomenon that I talked about in that Jungian talk. If you haven't watched it, you might find it interesting. I've got quite a few slides and images in there. I don't think I'm going to try to put any images in this one, or very few anyway. I'm just going to let it run. I don't know what I might do next. The fake Ethan Spike, the Portland transcript edition with somebody else's imitation of Matthew's Ethan Spike from 1866, is lost in the mails. The post office, as of 4 days ago, is officially looking into it. I haven't heard anything from them. Nobody seems to know where it is. The tracking says that it's on its way, but it never gets here. And I have no idea what could have happened to it. If worse comes to worse, I can just simply request a photographic copy and we'll work from there. But that may be a matter of weeks before I finally do that, because I have to wait and be sure that it officially is lost before I bug the society that I get my copies from, to make me a photographic copy. And then it takes a while for them to fulfill that order. So it could be a matter of weeks. So I don't know what else I might find of interest here. We'll see if people find this interesting.